Once upon a time, there was a man called Dara. Dara was a great big tall fella, and every time he had to go through a door, he would have to duck. Sometimes he would forget to duck, and he would bang his head on the door, and he'd say, "Ouch." But over time, Dara would forget to duck, and the more he banged his head, the more he forgot to duck, and he just walk through doors and bang his head over and over again. One day, Dara was lying on his couch watching TV when his friend Jimmy came round. And Jimmy said, "Well, Dara, how are you?" And Dara said, because Dara had had so many blows to the head, all he could really say was, "Uh." So Jimmy said to Dara, "Well, what's happening with you today? What's the crack?" And Dara put a big smile on his face, and he went, "Uh." Jimmy was disappointed. He knew the reason why Dara could only say, "Uh." He had watched Dara many times bang his head on doors. He had told him, "Watch out, duck your head," and just at the last second, Dara would turn and go, "Ooh," and bang his head on the top of the door. All the local kids would laugh whenever they saw Dara walking through a door, because they knew he was going to bang his head. But over time, the kids stopped laughing, because it just got so predictable. Everyone knew that if he saw Dara about to walk through a door, he was going to bang his head and go, "Oof." So, that day, as Jimmy was going home, he stopped into his friend Dan's house, as Dan worked in a furniture store where he upholstered couches. And he said, "Jimmy, how are you?" And Jimmy said, "Dan, I need a favour of you. I'm sick and tired of watching Big Dara bang his head on a door. Is there anything you can do to help this situation out? Anything at all?" And Daniel said, "You know what? I think I've got the very idea. Just this morning we got a little girl's chair in, and it has a big padded seat. And above the big padded seat, it has a little padded backrest. And one of the legs is shorter than the other three, and I don't think I'll be able to sell it. So, how about I take that backrest off, take the cushion, and see if you can find some way to attach it to Dara's head. What do you think?" And Jamie said, "Flip me, Daniel, that's a great idea. I just need to find some way of getting this onto Dara's head without him noticing what I'm doing." So later that night, Jamie was sitting in his house trying to think of an idea of how to help Dara. He was flicking through the TV channels, and he came across an old episode of the A-Team. And it was one of those episodes where they had to fly somewhere, and BA wasn't going to get on the plane, so they poisoned his milk. So, that looks like a good idea, thought Jimmy. So Jimmy went out the next morning and he went into the chemist, which was run by Mr. Brown. And he says, "Good morning, Mr. Brown. What's the crack?" And Mr. Brown said, "Jimmy, it's good to see you. Has that rash cleared up?" And Jimmy said, "It has, aye, thanks very much. I'm looking for some sleeping tablets. What can you do for me?" And Dr. Brown said, "What's wrong with you? Can you not sleep?" And he says, well, I've got a few things on my mind, so I do. A few things in my head." And Dr. Brown said, that's a holy Dara. That's the time we live in. Here, take these. One will put you out for 4 or 5 hours. 2 will give you a good solid 8 hours sleep. 4 or 5 could knock out a horse. And Jimmy said to Dr. Brown, "Sounds like they'll do the job. Thanks very much. How much do I owe you?" And Dr. Brown said, £4.50. So Jimmy gave him a fiver. And Dr. Brown says, "There's 50p change." And he says, "Cheers." And he said, "Goodbye." And he says, "See you later." And off they went. So the next day, after work, Jimmy went round to Dara's house. And Dara was lying there. And he looked up at Jimmy and he went, "Huh?" And Jimmy says, "Hello, Dara. How are you today?" And Dara said, "Huh." So Jimmy reached into his bag and he said, "Dara, I was down the town seeing Mr. Brown and I saw something that I thought you might like. I know you like milk. Would you like a big glass of nice ice cold milk?" And Dara had a great big smile on his face. His face lit up like a child on Christmas morning who's just come downstairs and has seen Father Christmas. And with a great big smile he said, "Yeah." And Jimmy went into the kitchen and he got down a big tall glass and he poured in all the milk that had 5 sleeping tablets crushed into it. And he gave it to Dara, and Dara said, "Hmm." So they sat and they had their milk, and at the end of it, Dara was starting to get a wee bit sleepy. And Jimmy said, "How you feeling?" And Dara said, "Rrrr." And Jimmy says, "That's good. Well, I'm going to head on. I'll call round tomorrow morning before going to work and see what's the crack with you. How does that sound?" And Dara said, "Yeah." So, the next morning Jimmy got up and he put on his shirt, and then he put on his boxers, and then he put on his trousers, and then he put on his left sock, and then he put on his right sock, and then he put on his left shoe, and then he put on his right shoe, and then he tied his left shoe, and then he tied his right shoe, and then he looked down and realised that he was wearing yesterday's socks. So he took off his right shoe, and he took off his left shoe, and he took off his right sock, and he put on his left sock, and he went to the drawer, and he took out a brand new pair of socks, and he put on the left sock, and then he put on the right sock, and then he put on his left shoe, and then he put on his right shoe, and then he tied his left shoe, And then he tied his right shoe, and he got up and he put on his jacket, and he took his keys, and he walked out the door, closing it firmly behind him, and then double-checked just to make sure the door was locked. He went out the door and across the street and round the town, and he walked past Mr. Brown, who for some reason today was dressed as a clown. And he went across the town until he was outside Dara's house. And he went in, and Dara was still sitting in a chair, fast asleep, snoring away like a good one. But every few minutes he would suddenly just almost open an eye and go, "Ah." So Jimmy took out the little padded bit of padding from the child's chair, and he tied it to Dara's head. He tied it loosely around his ears, back behind the head, so that Dara wouldn't even really feel it was there. And he wouldn't feel it was there because, as we've pointed out, Dara was a wee bit dopey. So Jamie left Dara lying there in the chair, and off he went to work. And he had a good day at work, and whenever he got home from work he had something to eat, and he had something to drink. And then he went across town, walked past Mr. Brown's chemist that was now closed, and he went over to Dara's house, and Dara was sitting there watching TV. And he just turned round and he looked at Jamie with a blank expression, blanker than normal. And then so Jamie said, "Well, Dara, how's your head today?" "Sore." And Jamie was shocked. He says, "Really? Your head's sore? Have you banged your head today?" And Dara looked at him blankly and went, "Yeah, maybe." Two words out of Dara. No one had heard 2 words out of Dara for months and months. So Jimmy says, "Are you coming outside for a walk?" So Dara looked at him and said, "Yeah." So he got up, put on his shoes, tied his shoes, put on his jacket, zipped up his jacket, and then walked out the door and banged his head. But it didn't feel quite as bad because of the cushion. And as they walked, all the locals would look at Dara. Not for the normal reason, but because he had a cushion tied to his forehead. But Dara was used to having people watch him. People looked at him all the time. He didn't really care. He had stopped caring a long time ago. After a while, they went into the pub. But the pub had big tall doors, so he didn't have to worry about banging his head there. And they were sitting having a pint. And Jamie said to Dara, "So Jamie, how's your head?" And Dara said, "Okay, I guess." And suddenly the whole pub went silent. Dara had spoken. People looked over and just said, Jimmy, what's wrong? What happened to Dara? Why's Dara talking?" And Jimmy says, "It's a secret, I'll tell you tomorrow." And everyone was like, "Flip me, pink, purple and blue." We never thought we'd see the day that we saw Dara talking. And Dara looked round and he says, "What are you looking at?" And everyone turned round, started looking back at their pints and back at their gin and tonics and their their Baileys and Hennessy's and Jamesons and ginger beers and all the various drinks and Guinnesses. And Dara looked at Jimmy and he said, "What's happening?" And Jimmy said, "I don't know what you mean. Come on, let's get out of here before any trouble kicks off." Because Dara always had a bad temper, and he was likely to hit anyone that looked at him twice. But he didn't do it these days. Ever since he had so many bangs on the head, he just lost his whole anger, and he turned into a docile big lump. So they walked on back to Dara's house, and once they got in the door, just as they were about to walk through it, Dara moved his head to the side and missed the top of the door. And Jamie said, "Dara, you ducked your head." And Dara says, "Well, of course I fucking did. What kind of Egypt just bangs his head into a door?" And Jamie just said, "Holy God Almighty. That's the longest sentence anyone's ever heard you say, and I'd say 1.5 years, maybe 1 2/3. Not as much as 2 years, maybe 1 year, 7 months. What do you think?" And Dara said, "Why are you always such a pernickety fussy git? Why couldn't you say 1.5 years and just leave it there? Why did you have to go in so much detail? Do you think I want to listen to all that? Do you think anyone wants to listen to the amount of detail that you put into stuff? You come round here every day and you used to tell me, 'Oh, I put on my left sock and then I put on my right sock. And then I put on my left shoe and then I put on my right shoe.' Do you think I cared? Do you think anybody cares, Jimmy? Do you think anyone cares about you at all? There was times where you would leave the house and I'd just be standing there banging my head against the door frame thinking, why did I pick him as a friend? Why? And I would bang my head so often and so hard that I would sometimes fall down and forget the reason I was doing it in the first place. But it was you, Jimmy. You caused all this. You're the reason why I banged my head." And Jimmy was shocked, surprised, taken aback, didn't know what to say. The words left him, stunned, in awe. He was just flabbergasted altogether. And he said to Dara, "You've been sitting here for months. You hardly say a word to anyone. All you ever said to anyone was, and that was because of me? Well, let me tell you this. The only reason that you are talking right now is because I tied that cushion to your head. I knocked you out with poisoned sleep tabletly milk, and you fell asleep, and I tied that to your head. I thought of using a Windsor knot. I tried using a double Windsor knot, and I couldn't remember the difference between a Windsor knot and a double Windsor knot. And then I tried to learn other types of knots, but I didn't have the time. So I used the knot I use whenever I tie my laces. What type of knot is that? Do you know what type of knot that is? I don't know. Does anyone know what type of knot that is?" And Dara interrupted him and said, "For the love of God, get out of my house before I bang my head off that wall." And Jimmy just looked at him and he said, "You're an ungrateful big lump, Dara. You're an ungrateful git. I don't know why I put up with you this long. I figured it was just because you were such a good listener." And Dara said, "I wasn't a good listener. I had banged my head so often I went soft on the head, and I had no choice but to listen to you. Do you think anybody wants to listen to you? And Jimmy just stood there, and he says, "What are you trying to say, Dara?" I'm confused. I'm flummoxed. I'm taken aback and surprised. Do you mean you don't love me? Do you not like me anymore? Did you ever like me? Were you just using me? And Dara says, "Get out. Get out of my house and don't darken these doors again as long as I've got a head on my shoulders. And by the way, here," and he took the cushion off his forehead and he threw it at Jimmy. "Take that with you. I don't know where you got it, but it smells of arse." And Jimmy just looked at him, and he says, "That came from a little girl's toy chair. I got it from Dan. You know Dan, the upholsterers. I told you before about Dan. He makes chairs and sofas." And Dara just yelled, "Get out. I don't care. You're doing it again. You go into so much detail. No one cares. Please, just go before I put you out through that door." And Jamie said, "I get the idea I'm not welcome here." And Dara just lost his temper. He walked over and he grabbed Jimmy by the back of the neck and the back of the jeans, and he frog marched him to his front door. He opened the front door and threw Jimmy out onto the grass. He says, "Don't you come round here again, my young fella, or I'll take my boot and I'll shove it so far up your backside you'll wonder if you had leather for breakfast." And Jimmy just sat there in the grass, looking all around him and feeling pretty pissed off with the world. And he looked up at Dara and he said, "Are we still on for darts tomorrow night?" And Dara just gave him one look and he just said, "Huh?"